Sega.
Today I'll be looking at the 1981 Sega arcade game Frogger. The first thing you might say is that it's not a Sega game, that it's actually by Konami. And you'd be right, and yet wrong, at the same time. Let me explain. The game itself was originally created by Konami in Japan, but when it was released worldwide, Sega, and Gremlin, an arcade specialist Sega had taken over, took on the rights for the game. For the North American release, the title screen even says the game is copyright Sega, which is why I'm covering it as a Sega arcade game. Sega also had their name attached to the 1983 PC port. In the mid-1980s, Sega were becoming quite involved with home arcade ports. They also published Spy Hunter and Tapper in 1984. However, both of those games state that they are by Bally Midway, so I'm not covering them in this playlist. But Frogger is different, so let's get into it. What is Frogger? Frogger is a classic game of guiding little frogs home whilst avoiding all manner of hazards both on road and river. In 1982, it was called the game with the most possible ways to die, as almost everything on the screen can kill you. What are we comparing? Well, I'll start by looking at the original 1981 arcade game running on Konami Z80 based hardware. I'll be using the MAME emulator for this one. Next, I'll look at the PC Booter disc version converted by Sierra Online in 1983. I'm running this using DOSBox. Finally, I'll cover the Windows Remake, published by Hasbro Interactive in 1997. I'll run this under Windows 10 using DG Voodoo 2 to fix up some of the graphic glitches. The original 1981 arcade version debuted in Japan, before Sega took a punt and licensed the game into North America later that year. It proved highly successful. Let's look at the game itself. The game opens with this rather sedate sequence where frogs are converted into the name of the game. Following this, there are a number of how to play and high score screens, as is common with 1980s arcade games. When you start the game, your frog is placed at the bottom of the screen, with a time limit counting down. You have to hop to the homes at the top of the screen whilst avoiding both the road traffic and water-based hazards. The water itself is also fatal to the frog, which may contradict biology, but makes for a better game. As you play, you score points for moving, getting home, eating flies, and, rather more intriguingly, taking home female frogs. As the game progresses, it gradually throws in more hazards, such as snakes, alligators and otters, whilst traffic goes from running at a slow pace to literally racing. Overall, it's a responsive and fun game, which is why it's one of the all-time classics. Now, watch me play a round of the arcade version without yapping over the top. When various home versions were planned for Frogger, Sierra Online took the rights for magnetic media-based systems, basically floppy disk and cassette tape, which included the PC. This 1983 port came on a disc and runs as a PC booter game, which means you don't need DOS or Windows to play it, you just pop the disc in, turn on the PC and it loads. The first thing you'll see here is that there's no intro sequence at all, just this rather unexciting title screen, followed by basic looking menus. When you start the game, two things become apparent. Firstly, it's running in the low colour CGA graphics mode, which is usually limited to 4 colours. However, the developers managed to hack in a blue coloured strip for the water too, which was pretty amazing for the time. More than that, if you press F6 you can actually cycle through the various CGA colour options, although this can lead to the road looking like a river should you choose the wrong option. Gameplay wise, it's semi-close to the arcade original with a similar feature set and numerous ways to be killed. There is however a bit of a bug here. In the arcade, when you move your frog in any direction, as shown here, it moves one complete frog-sized block at a time. However, on the PC port, moving sideways only moves half a block. This means it requires twice as many key presses to move sideways than forwards and backwards, making it harder to move around than the arcade version. I'm not sure if this was a conscious decision to increase the difficulty or a genuine bug. The PC booter version progresses much like the original arcade, with increasingly difficult hazards to negotiate, but the timing and location things appear isn't accurate to the arcade and can either slow down or run too fast depending on how fast your computer is or how DOSBox is configured. It's a bit clunky but plays kind of like the original. It's time for me to play around on this version. Sorry about the bleepy music. This 1997 remake is sometimes called Frogger He's Back, due to how the title appears on the box. Technically, it has little to connect it with the Sega arcade version, as it was licensed by Hasbro Interactive from the original Japanese developers Konami, rather than Sega, and developed by SCE Cambridge Studio, who also made the PlayStation version. The game starts with an intro video that references the original arcade version, as you can see here. The gameplay begins with a number of retro levels that aim to replicate the original arcade game format. However, unlike the original, these play as four-way scrollable levels that are bigger than the viewing area, rather than a single static screen. Note that I'm running the game here at its original maximum resolution of 1024 by 768 pixels. In this game, when you get to each home space, you collect a colourful frog instead of filling an empty gap. The ultimate aim in each level of this version is to collect all 5 colourful frogs. Overall, gameplay is similar to the original arcade, and the remix music is cute, but it can be a little difficult to determine when to jump sometimes. Once you're past the opening retro levels, the game changes somewhat into much more open levels with extra hazards, items to collect and so on. Throughout you have the ability to rotate the screen, as well as croak and stick out your tongue, plus super jump. But that's going away from the original arcade game, so I'm not going to look at this part of the game anymore in this comparison. Okay, it's time for me to shut up and play the game. Let's compare each version at the pixel level. We'll start with a screenshot of the original arcade. Now let's compare it to the PC booter version, and it's pretty easy to spot the difference. Going back to the arcade version, let's compare to the 1997 remake, and yes, you're not going to get these two versions mixed up either. It's time to put all the versions head to head. Frogger has never had an arcade perfect port on the PC, although there are a large number of knockoffs and clones out there. The PC booter version was playable, though imperfect, whilst the 1997 remake is a fun way to revisit the Frogger concept for a more modern audience, although it can get frustrating to play. If you enjoyed this video on Frogger, give it a like. Or subscribe to find out when the next video goes live.